Freedom Fighters is quite a tricky game to discuss, at least in my case. Freedom Fighters is a game I never played growing up, despite being made by a great developer and being critically acclaimed by players and critics alike. And yet it never graced my original Xbox. I heard that Freedom Fighters is a cult classic among the 6th generation of consoles, and in doing research for this long overdue video, I didn't find any official sales numbers for Freedom Fighters on the internet, so I can only speculate. Regardless, I heard about Freedom Fighters almost 20 years later after watching Critical Nobody's video on IO Interactive's other games. It mentions Freedom Fighters first, and Mr. Nobody went into depth on the mechanics and how much enjoyment he had with the game. It intrigued me enough to give it a try for myself during Christmas of 2021. Continuing on the brief history for this game, Freedom Fighters, once again, was made by IO Interactive, who, if you didn't know, produced the Hitman series. You know, Agent 47, bald man in a suit. You don't recognize him? Okay. They decided to make something different from their Hitman series and announced Freedom Fighters at E3 2002, and was to be published by EA. You know, but before they went horrible. It was released in the latter half of 2003, and was one of the few games that IO made that wasn't published under Eidos Interactive. Freedom Fighters has you playing as Chris Stone, your average American Joe, who's pulled into a nationwide conflict when the Soviet Union unexpectedly invades the United States, putting New York City under martial law, and taking over presumably the entire country. From here, you meet up with an underground resistance led by Isabella Angelina, and you must use guerrilla tactics to slowly but surely take back New York from the Soviet Union. That's pretty much the most amount of story you get in this game. It wasn't made with the mindset of having this grand adventure where the protagonists discover something about themselves. You'd think this is where I'd stop discussing the story and go right into gameplay, but I want to get some things out of the way first. I must say that the writing is pretty good for being a story as simple as this. It's got a lot of charm, and the voice acting helps add to that.
Yeah, man, the Reds are everywhere, and they brought plenty of toys. Yesterday, our boys tried to blow a bridge on their supply route. Only today, Red trucks are rolling back and forth like nothing happened. I tell you, if I demoed that bridge, there'd be nothing left to put back together. Instead, they got more soldiers than ever sitting on it. You'll give me some TNT, and I'll blow that baby, or die trying.
Hang on, let's get real. That bridge is important, but we really need to capture the command center, too. The Soviets deploy their troops from the old fire station. We need to take control back.
Hey, don't expect to crash their party and say, "Hasta la vista" to everyone in a red beret. They got snipers and choppers up there. This ain't no kiddie park.
However, the game has plenty of questionable design choices as well, at least when it comes to the writing. For one, Chris is made into a mute avatar for the player as soon as gameplay properly starts, despite the fact that the game breaks that rule less than 30 minutes after starting a new game.
Well, who cares? You know, her loss. Hey, pop the clutch, let's get on with it. Let's stop with the worksheet today, bro.
Let's see. Isabella Angelina, a condo in Midtown Manhattan, drain plug, and a leaky garbage disposal.
Do we have to get the crappiest route every Monday morning? I wish for once we get a fancy condo on the east side with a view. Whoa. Isabella Angel whatever. She's that hot spokesbabe for the Warning Against Reds movement? I saw her on TV yesterday.
No idea. Besides, I don't follow all that conspiracy crap like you do.
What do you mean, conspiracy crap? Doesn't the Soviet invasion of South America bother you? You need a reality check, bro. Know what? Next thing you know, you'll be waking up under a Russian flag, and you won't think it's conspiracy crap then.
Right.
The only time he gets his voice back is when he's giving commands to his squad members, a speech that happens in the penultimate level, and the ending, where he speaks to Isabella about his thoughts on the events of the past and future. I never understood why they felt the need to do this. Chris could easily have given his thoughts during mission briefings, but instead he just stays silent as Isabella and Bagston continue to ramble on about mission objectives. There's no reason for Chris to act silent for most of the game, only for him to regain his voice at key moments. It doesn't make sense. The other characters aren't much better, as they simply have one-note personalities to them. The writing only has charm to back it up, nothing else. There are neat references to the developers themselves and some small environmental storytelling moments, but not too much else beyond that. To be fair, it's a game focused on shooting Russians that somehow invaded and took over the entire world, and the game is not going to try and convince you otherwise, so I guess I shouldn't be too hard on it. Nothing substantial happens in the story aside from its twist. If you don't want spoilers, I'll put a timestamp up, but I'm just going to say don't play this game for the story. It's not why you should play it. So Mr. Jones is actually Colonel Boba, the head of the KGB. He's been disguising himself as Mr. Jones, even going as far as potentially getting taken away by his own people in the game's opening, to try and make his way into the Freedom Fighter base. He does, and after you assassinate General Tatarin, he reveals himself, captures Isabella, and leaves you to die. The only reason I could imagine him doing this at that point in time was to surpass Tatarin and become the general of the entire Russian army, especially since he makes a point of it during Tatarin's funeral. You don't even get to kill him either. After his betrayal, he doesn't show up at all, and you don't even get to fight him or a super powerful version of him in the final area. Is it set up at all? Sort of? A brief phone call with Tatiana Kempinski in a broadcast reveals him for the first time, and a sort of discussion between Isabella and Bagston kind of hints at something.
Sometimes I wonder how Mr. Jones gets all his information.
Beats me. He sure is connected, though. We'd be nowhere without it.
What did he do before the war?
I don't know, probably worked on Wall Street or something. I think Chris and him go way back.
Presentation hasn't aged all that great. Granted, most games from the 6th generation, with a few exceptions, haven't aged all that well in the graphics department. I shouldn't be judging a game that was released in 2003 to be compared to the games released 2 decades later, but Beyond Good and Evil, released the same year, looks great even by today's standards. Not even the HD version. The original PC port still looks fantastic. Freedom Fighters has little excuse in my opinion. The only thing that Freedom Fighters has going for it in its presentation department is the music composed by Jesper. There are quite a few songs in here that are nice and fit the mood, but for the most part the music implementation is lacking. Most if not all music is randomly cycled through as you go through levels. I could be wrong, but it hurts when some tracks could easily fit into certain sections, but are instead given just mediocre music tracks. 2 of the tracks are really good, such as March of the Empire, and Freedom Fighters. But other than that, everything else is merely fitting for the situation. Nothing you'd want to listen to on its own. But story and presentation isn't the main focus I'll put on Freedom Fighters. The main draw is the gameplay. Freedom Fighters is a third-person shooter with squad command elements. Shooting in general is relatively fine, with decent impact and sound design on weapons. Although due to the PC port I'm playing, sometimes sound doesn't play when I'm firing my weapons, even while in the middle of spraying down an enemy with lead. You go through levels that are split into multiple areas, and you're free to tackle them in any order you wish. At least in theory, but I'll get to that later. Each area has multiple objectives that you need to complete, which include blowing up important structures, taking down helipads, rescuing prisoners, or raising the American flag on top of flagpoles, since once you do that, you have officially taken back your land. In the early game of Freedom Fighters, in both playthroughs, the first few levels that you have to go through can be pretty rough. It wasn't completely unbearable, but once again, a few choices made by the developers can dampen certain design elements. I picked the hard difficulty for both my first and second playthrough. Even with proper knowledge of how things played out, it didn't save me from the endless frustration and unlucky moments. On the Freedom Fighter difficulty, which is hard, enemies are more bullet spongy, deal more damage, and while you're stuck with lower health, that in and of itself isn't the problem. It's the built-in inaccuracy of your weapons on the PC version. The only exception is the sniper rifle and turret, which will always go directly where you aim. This inaccuracy means that trying to line up precise shots with any weapon is damn near impossible, and taking enemies out from a distance or trying to take pot shots will never be a viable strategy. IO clearly designed the game in favor of a run-and-gun style of play. When doing this, the game can be a lot more fun, and in situations where you're pinned down or you need to be tactical with your movements, firing semi-auto is the better option, but it sometimes will lead to frustrating moments where you question why the game was designed like this. With that run-and-gun playstyle in mind, the weapon selection needs to fit that accordingly, and it does for the most part. On the hard difficulty, you'll want to value consistency. I do, at least, in a game like Freedom Fighters, which is why the assault rifle and LMG are the best weapons in the game. They have good damage, high fire rate, great range, and they drop a ton of ammo, especially the assault rifle, as it's the most common weapon drop in the game. The shotgun is great for close range, but sometimes close range isn't the great option to be in. The SMG has similar properties, but it burns through ammo like candy, and the recoil pattern is absolutely insane, making it unreliable. The sniper rifle is only brought in a handful of times and has much more limited ammo than other weapons, and you need to be accurate, lining up headshots to be efficient with the thing. To balance out the weapon inaccuracy, you're able to command a group of other freedom fighters under your wing. These guys are pretty reliable and are able to handle themselves just fine. You're able to command them to do specific things like attack an enemy or defend a point, but there's little reason to use these commands. In my case, the only reason why I used them was to call them back to me when they were drifting away to fight an enemy I didn't want them to, or to attack one of the heavy armored units. Once again, in the early game, the low number of squad members you can have ends up causing difficulty to even clear small squads. Now this wouldn't be a problem if the inaccuracy issues I mentioned earlier weren't in play, and you weren't up against platoons of Russian soldiers while you're stuck with 2 or 3 other guys. After a while though, once you get a decent amount of soldiers following you, the game becomes much more fun and less frustrating. As you complete objectives, you'll gain what's known as charisma, which is basically XP. Once you fill the bar, you're able to gain another member of your squad. At max, you're able to have up to 12 other freedom fighters with you. Once you get about 5 or 6 members with you, you're able to have much less of a fight for survival, since your companions end up eating the bullets instead of yourself, allowing you to clean up and have a much easier time, even if there are still moments that will catch you off guard. Ultimately, the combat is fun, but it's supported by somewhat frustrating and annoying mechanics, mainly the save points and the objectives and their consequences. Public service announcement. When looking through your objective list and you see a helipad objective, get rid of it first if you can. It's entirely possible to get through certain sections and complete objectives with attack choppers and reinforcement helicopters in your way, but it makes it so difficult. As an example, I purposely didn't blow up the helipad during the power plant mission. When going to the final objective that required me to pass through an attack chopper, it destroyed my force and my character within moments. You cannot destroy attack choppers without rocket launchers, which is the rarest weapon to get. They're in set locations and certain missions, and are dropped by maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3 specific enemies in the game. So, they're rare. So if you want to get through this section, you need to run past the chopper and take out the 2 squads of enemies, assuming that the chopper didn't get you first, or you backtrack all the way to the area where the helipad is, blow it up, and then you can get through without immediately dying. The game gives you objectives you can tackle in any order you wish, but does it really? When I heard that this game had great freedom in its mission design, I was expecting the ability to do any objective in any area in any order I wish. But that's not exactly the case. And then there's the save points. The only way to save your game is to either return to your underground base or quick save at one of the spaced out manholes around each area. No other way to save your game. So even after completing a difficult section of combat, you cannot save the game unless you complete all the objectives or backtrack to another manhole, which can lead to occasions where you're at the very end of a mission but you die and you have to redo the entire mission all over again because there's just one single manhole. Frankly speaking, I compare a lot of Freedom Fighters to the first Max Payne released in 2001. Max Payne 1 has a lot of frustrating weapon inaccuracy, inconsistent damage and health for enemies and the player, and most infuriating to me, cheap enemy spawns which seem to be there for the sake of punishing the player for not exploring or being 100% observant. Look at this example from Freedom Fighters. In order for this jump to work, he has to place himself in a room with only one exit and no other hiding spots. He's trapped himself in the room with the hope that this random guy would come in so he could burst him down. That is gameplay worthy of serious profanity. In fact, a lot of this game is like Max Payne 1. The gameplay issues I mentioned, the dark themes and tone of the story, although Max Payne is significantly darker, a glass half full ending, the fourth wall breaks, and meta writing. Even though I tore the game to shreds, Freedom Fighters, despite its rough edges, is deserving of its cult classic status almost 20 years after its release. It's certainly not flawless and shouldn't be treated as such, but it's a good time, provided you can play it on the normal difficulty. You'll miss out on an extra mission, but it's not worth the trouble, trust me. It's unfortunate that, due to the split with Eidos Interactive, Freedom Fighters 2 was never going to happen, despite the fact that everyone at IO wanted to make it, and players and critics wanted more from the franchise. Some games never even get the opportunity to shine, and I'm glad that Freedom Fighters and IO Interactive had the ability to share this treat with the world.